Danny Joe LaBrecque is the creator, puppeteer, and host of Danny Joe's Treehouse, a show that invites families to come out and play with big thoughts, ideas, and feelings. I talked to Danny Joe about the development of Danny Joe's Treehouse and how he has been able to produce 3 seasons of the show completely on his own on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media, and now back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Well, Danny LaBrecque, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. As you and I talked about before we even started rolling, you and I are a little bit like kindred spirits in that we love to create things on our own. And I'm super excited to talk to you because you are somebody who had an idea for a show and has just started making the show. And I admire that and I respect that. So I'm excited to talk to you about that process. But I do want to start the way I always start this show by asking you, do you remember your first exposure to puppetry?
Yes, I do. And I talk about it a lot when I'm working with kids in the classroom. I don't think I called it a puppet or thought of a puppet. So this is a hindsight experience. But when I was very, very young, my parents gave me a teddy bear, and that teddy bear became my best friend. And I would move it around like this, and I was totally self-regulating when my mom got sick with cancer, when heavy stuff was happening in our house. I was talking to my imaginary friend through my teddy bear, and that, I believe, was my real first experience with therapeutic puppetry. And eventually he became an actual puppet. I brought him to the preschool classrooms where I was teaching, and I just made a little slit on the back and turned him into a simple puppet. Great way to make a puppet if you're not comfortable with making puppets like the pros. I'm certainly not comfortable with that, so I just made a little slit and worked my way up to making other types of puppets. But I think that really was my very first experience hands-on, and then through the screen, it was shows like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that really connected with me.
And growing up, were your parents creative?
Yes, yeah, they were far out. They were really far out hippies. They, my mom was a journalist and did a lot of creative writing, and my father was a photographer, and we moved around a lot. Because of that, we started homeschooling before it was called homeschooling. We called it home study, I think, for a while. And then when my mom got sick, my dad took a more practical job in the plastics industry, and kind of just focused on that, and has now in his retirement gotten back into taking photos, and it makes me very happy to see him expressing himself through that art again. But yeah, there was always a creative element. Because I was a lonely kid, my parents encouraged me to do my drawing, and I loved watching MGM movies with my mom and copying the tapping that Gene Kelly would do, or Danny Kaye. And she signed me up for my first dance class when I was 8, and I ended up doing ballet and tap, all that stuff through and well into my 20s. And now I'm just awkwardly getting back into it. My kids are in dance. Now I've got a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they take classes at the local university. They offer programs for younger kids, and they just started offering programs for old parents who want to get back into it but are rusty. They don't call it that.
Right. That's the official name.
Right. Yeah. So I've been hoisting up the old tights. It's like that scene in The Incredibles, But always had something to do with art in my life growing up.
And was there any thought growing up that you could make a career of it? Like this was your career path? Or would you try and did your parents or you try to think like, oh no, I need something a little bit more sensible?
No, there wasn't. I didn't get that voice from my folks. My folks were very much like, just try to be happy. Try to be happy. Find what's going to make you happy. Because we did have a lot of heavy stuff going on in my childhood. So they were just like, whatever outlet you can have. And I think because my dad, although he was very proud of his work in plastics, it wasn't his passion. I think he didn't necessarily want me to have to go that route. It was kind of funny. I did hit the point of starving artist in my 20s, and I ended up applying for a art teacher job at a preschool, and I fell in love with teaching preschool through that experience. But my mom, when she heard that I was going to become a teacher, a formal teacher, she was like, "You're going to work for the man?" I was like, "But it's the preschool teacher, man. It's still
Yeah.
it's pretty light, mom." But yeah, there was never any pressure to have the fall back from them.
Yeah. And what was the so you said there was a sort of a starving artist phase that pushed you into teaching, and I certainly know I spent several years substitute teaching myself, so I know that for artists teaching is a good job. It seems like.
Yeah.
Um, it's been several years since I substitute teach, so I can't speak for now. But did you have to go back to school to get a teaching credential or anything
I
like that?
did, yeah. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I did sculpture and children's illustration. That's what I studied there for 2 years, a little over 2 years, and then I dropped out to pursue musical theater stuff, and that's when I got hungry, and found this job as an art teacher. And long story short, just a couple of weeks into the school year, one of the teachers quit unexpectedly, and he was male, and the director of the school thought, well, you're a male too, this might make for an easier transition for the kids if you just become the helper for now, just shadow the lead teacher with way more experience. And I just fell in love with everything about it. It was great. It combined everything that I liked. I always loved working with younger kids. I always loved playing pretend. I felt like I could speak the language of play really well. There was the turning point experience that got me into going back to school was the lead teacher that I was under. Her name was Miss Kathy. The kids called her Miss Kathy. She had to use the restroom and left me in the classroom alone with the kids, and I was very nervous about that because it was only a couple of weeks in, and it was like in a movie. She left, and I turned around, and it felt like all the kids just turned around and looked at me. And they were doing free play in different areas of the classroom and the blocks and dress up and art. But I just felt like, oh gosh, and sure enough, it got louder and it got more wild, and paint was being thrown around, and I just started working the classroom because I'm not a yeller. It doesn't work. It just creates more stress, I think, when you raise your voice with kids, especially in general, I think. But if you're calm and cool, you can usually change the tone. And honestly, I was very much trying to like do my best version of Mr. Rogers, because that was the touchstone for me. And eventually I got the classroom under control, and I found out later on that Miss Kathy and Miss Nancy, the director of the school, they were peeking in. There was like little rectangle windows in the door, each door, and they were just kind of watching and laughing at the rookie. But then after, they were like, "Hey, you actually have some potential." And the director of the school said, "I want you to go back to school. I'll help you out with the first 2 classes, and if you like it, you should continue." And then I ended up studying at National Louis University in Chicago, doing behavioral science with a focus in early childhood development. And like I said, it just combined everything that I loved. It was like, oh, this is the thing that I should be doing.
Yeah. Were you using any puppets in your teaching?
Yes. And in the same way that I was using the wooden blocks and whatever else was close by to entertain the puppets that happened to be in the classroom, or the socks or the bags or whatever. But yeah, I always liked doing voices, and then soon I found that when more complicated stuff would come up, a lot of the kids felt a little more comfortable talking to the puppets than to me, and I saw that as a big responsibility. And I kind of leaned into that when I became a more experienced teacher, and I started visiting lots of different schools with puppets, and a lot of the younger kids I was working with, they were dealing with pretty complex social issues. And all I would do is, I going back to the teddy bear, he's behind me on my desk. I'd bring him up and say, "How do you think Teddy's feeling today?" And I no movement, no music, nothing, no indicators. And the kids would just wait, and it would get quiet. and then they would start telling their story. Like it was obviously their experience that day. You know, Teddy's sad because his mom was yelling at him, or, you know, A, B, or C happened. And then we would just slowly explore that in that safe play space. And it was like, I always compare it to kids that play are like lucid dreamers. You can, if you're really looking and you're really listening, you can know exactly what they've been experiencing. You might not know the whole setup. You might not know if it's a firsthand experience or a secondary experience, but you can get a pretty good idea, and then you can start to guide a little bit and support and just be in the moment with them. I see it as an incredibly powerful thing, puppetry.
Well, your show, Danny Joe's Treehouse, celebrated its 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
And I would love to go back to the beginning of those 20 years and how did this show, what were the seeds for this show developing, and how did it get started?
I was in the classroom and just listening to the kids talking about their favorite shows and what they liked watching. And I decided to go home and watch some of the same shows just to have a better frame of reference. And I was a bit disappointed. Like when I was a kid, there was definitely tons of cartoons. I loved Looney Tunes and the Flintstones, and Bozo the Clown was awesome, you know, and like that type of kids entertainment. I call it cookies for breakfast, and not as an insult, but as a good, like, yum. Of course, kids are going to like cookies for breakfast. That's great.
All right.
But you also need to have, you know, a healthy diet and provide, food for thought. So I noticed that a lot of the types of teacher caregivers through the screen, like Rogers and Burton and Sherry Lewis, and, you know, the list goes on and on, Captain Kangaroo, that they were kind of fading out, and we were getting more of the caricatures, and Sesame Street was holding strong, you know, going through it. This is early aughts, definitely going through an evolution to kind of compete with things like Blue's Clues a little bit in style and form. But when it came to just teachers, just people that weren't really acting, but just looking right through the camera lens, and, you know, being in the moment and talking about pretty complex stuff in that safe preschool sort of way that a preschool teacher can do, I just didn't see any. So I thought, well, I could probably do that. I know a lot of my kids at the time in Chicago, they were dealing with social issues much more complicated than what I had experienced as a kid. But, you know, still heavy experiences for me, and it meant a lot having the Rogers and the Burtons. And so I wanted to try to help and offer my services that way. Because again, the next step in my evolution was, well, yeah, of course, be a local kid show host. Like that would be an amazing job, you know? And I started, this is going to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning. I started going around and essentially asking for permission, going to different local TV stations and networks and saying, I've got this rough idea, I've got a script, and would you please let me do it? You know, which is such a funny way to approach it. But I think in some ways we've been taught that you kind of have to go through that system.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily true today. I think there are not that many gatekeepers anymore. But if you want to do something, don't wait for someone else to let you do it. Just start doing it. We've all got these supercomputers in our pockets now that can do all of the things that a TV studio could do in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s even. You know, you can make some really high quality things. And even if it's not high quality, like the first things that I was doing with Danny Joe's Treehouse, it was just looking into my smartphone and being outside, and I was just practicing being myself and not being a character, which takes a lot of work too, to be your authentic self.
So the early shows were just you were filming stuff on your smartphone. Were you putting them online anywhere? Were you editing them? How were they developing in the early days?
The early stuff I was just putting up on YouTube, and then Facebook. And luckily, I married a woman who is a trained cinematographer and photographer and editor. She studied at Northwestern University, and her name is Stephanie, and she's brilliant, and she's my creative partner too. And so she helped me produce the first proper, like, Danny Joe's Treehouse episode in form, that leaned more into nature-based, play-based education stuff. But it just kept evolving from there. And yeah, most of the delivery platforms were the free social media things, the YouTubes, and but then four years ago, 3 years ago, I just started getting all of these messages from my core audience, saying, "Hey, we were enjoying your show, but the algorithm led us to some stuff that we felt uncomfortable with. We're really tired of these commercials popping up. Can you do anything about that?" And this is all pre-COPPA stuff. I wasn't agreeing for that stuff to interrupt the show, but it just kept coming up, and I felt frustrated with that. And then social media stuff, I knew it was unhealthy for me as an adult, and I felt, or at least it could be unhealthy for many adults. For me, for sure, it was unhealthy. So I got off of it for that reason. But I also felt like I didn't want to be one of the reasons to bring in kids into an environment that I didn't feel was completely ready yet. Like the potential of social media, of course, that's amazing. Sharing thoughts and ideas and feelings, I love that, and collaborating on things, and I miss that part. But the sacrifice of kids getting hurt or seeing scary, icky things, I just couldn't justify being part of it. So I walked away from that right at the same time that we got picked up by Cadoodle TV. And ironically, I had no way to let people know we were on this platform. And, naturally we got a bit of an audience there just organically. But more recently, we signed with Sensical TV from Common Sense Networks, and Common Sense Media backs them. And I love it. It's the best platform. It's this amazing alternative to YouTube. It's all human reviewed, educator reviewed. It's really hard to get on. You know that the quality of content is going to be pristine and age appropriate in three age groups that Common Sense has identified. I'm in the 2 to 4 section. That's where Danny Joe's Treehouse lives. And they're just really helpful with navigating all things social media and making sure that you're connecting with parents without potentially sacrificing the social emotional health of young kids. So I feel like I'm finally getting there. I'm still not making any money off of it, but we'll crack that nut one day.
Yeah.
But for now, I'm just happy. Like I'm finally starting to reach an audience without compromising my values.
Yeah, and it's even so weird with, we could do a whole hour just talking about YouTube.
Yeah.
But YouTube now, too, with their rules because they're trying the best a big company can make a place safe. Yeah. They're trying.
Yes, they are.
But they're also, if you mark that your video is for kids, they don't put it out to anybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they don't allow comments on it, and they don't allow voting on it and all this stuff, which, hey, may be good, but then nobody sees your stuff.
Right. It's how the system.
It doesn't show up.
Yeah, that core code. The layers and layers and layers on top of that core code. It's all about the shareability of it and the likes of it, and and if you know that's unhealthy for your audience and you don't do that, you're not going to do great on YouTube. Although now they're working really hard to produce stuff internally. But that's different. That's almost becoming, they're becoming their own network instead of just hosting and giving a voice to all these amazing creators. This is kind of what it boils down to for me. Like if you look at the YouTube Kids app, they have their description, and I'm folks definitely like fact check me on it, but it's something to the effect of, hey, we are trying really hard, but no platform is perfect, and sometimes inappropriate stuff is going to get through, but we're going to keep trying. And it's admirable to admit it and to show that you really are trying to fix this thing that maybe at the core is hard to fix for kids, but that's all well and good. But if you saw that above a daycare where you're dropping off your kids, we're trying our best. Sometimes, weird, inappropriate things are going to come in, but, we'll try it. There's no way you would, or maybe you would if you didn't have any other options,
Yeah.
So it's kind of how I think about it. And I worry that it comes off as judgy or whatever. again, I really like the potential of social media. I know it's going to grow. It's always going to be here. Like tech and media, it's always going to evolve and change. TikTok is going to be old new. It'll be the MySpace of some future generation. Like
Right.
there's always going to be new stuff, more exciting things. But people are pretty consistent in our needs and our ability to figure out the right way to use a tool without hurting ourselves or somebody else. It's just we're still in this learning curve. I think the technology is so savvy to a degree, but it's still kind of this dumb beast.
Yeah.
I've got a new puppet for season 3 that I named Algorithm, and he's like he's very much an Ollie sort of character from Kukla, Fran and Ollie. He's got that vibe, and he's just
Yeah.
always suggesting stuff like our little authoritarian king puppet's enjoying an apple. Oh, hey, if you like apples, you're gonna love this, and just spits out a banana. And if you like bananas, you're gonna love these tickets to Hawaii. What? There's this,
Yeah.
and it's I think so. I'm bringing that up because a good approach or approach that I'm trying out this season for Treehouse is we can try as hard as we can to fix the tech where it's at right now. Like I've been in meetings where people are talking a lot about metaverse and this time around we're going to get ahead of the game and we're going to make it what we want it to be. But those were the same sort of conversations that the inventors of Facebook and Twitter were having. It's going to change the world. It's going to be so positive. You never know
Yeah.
how a tool's going to be used. So I think that it's maybe better to lean into teaching young kids right now how to think critically in person and also in the sandbox, but also when they're on the screen and when the algorithm's throwing these random commercials at them that don't even look like commercials anymore. Or if there's that blurry line that you were talking about between, is this cartoon for adults or kids, or is this puppetry for, like it doesn't fit into these perfect little categories. And really it never has. I mean, Looney Tunes wasn't intended for children, like
Yeah.
there are those lines. And I think it's about, it's not just about the people on this side of the screen giving it out, like the people receiving it, we need to empower them too. So it's not just like more cookies for breakfast, like make
Right.
some good choices.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the puppets on your show because you have a wonderful cast of puppets
Thanks.
on the show. I heard in an interview that you built these puppets, right? Had you ever built puppets before?
No, but I did a ton of research. Like again, huge Mr. Rogers fan, but I started looking at shows that came before Rogers. Like there were he's always held up on a pedestal in some ways, but he learned from others too. Like there was Miss Frances from Ding Dong School and Friendly Giant and Fran and Ollie again, and just and that's like nationally syndicated programs. But looking at the local kid shows, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. Varying degrees of
Yeah.
silly to like serious to you name it, just amazing things. So I dug into that and started looking at the early roots of children's media coming out of radio, and I loved the puppets that didn't have moving parts. Like I love the Muppets like everybody else, but I I think they do so much of the work for you, especially a skilled puppeteer like yourself. It so becomes real. I'm kind of following it. Like it's that projection thing that I was talking about earlier. I think like my teddy bear, there's no moving parts or anything, so you're kind of forced to do a decent amount of the work. And I think puppets like from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or Howdy Doody or just the hard faced puppets. I was really attracted to those. And I liked that retro feel. I wanted to hook the adults too and kind of speak to that inner child, so they would co-view a bit, as they say. So I hadn't built a puppet before, and I just started sculpting. I knew how to sculpt, so they're all made out of clay and super heavy, like 4 to 5 pounds on your finger. So I ended up doing a Kickstarter and 3D scanning them, and I tried to sculpt them in a way where it looked like carved wood. Originally, I tried to carve them, but I just didn't get there. I'm still trying to learn how to do that. But yeah, I make all the puppets and all the sets, and I try to give them that retro can be thrown around so much, but that period of like late 50s, early 60s kids television where everything is made by hand and you can tell, but it's still pretty magical, and
Mm-hmm.
inspirational, I think, for the kids watching. It's like, oh, I think I could figure out how to do that. Like I try to lean into that. Um,
Yeah, they have a great fun look. If anybody listening who has not seen them, they have a fun look, but they do kind of look like, oh, I think if I had, they're not. I'm not using this as an insult, but
oh,
it's like they're simple. You
oh,
know what I mean?
yeah.
Like it's just like it's like I could kids could be like I could make something like this, and they would think that it's pretty
I mean,
close.
it's a lump of clay and a couple of marbles.
Right.
I wanted that twinkle in the eye and I did marbles, but yeah, I really, yeah, and I've done plenty of workshops through the screen and in person where we've made puppets out of socks and paper bags. But um, the clay thing, everybody really likes that. I think it just grounds you. Some kids don't like the sensory stuff, but yeah, I like leaning into that process too, showing how it's made. And I'm really like I'm not hiding, especially with the season 1 and 2 that are on Sensical. Um, I'm not hiding the fact that I'm the one doing the voices. Like we're in the same shot. Partially because
Mm-hmm.
when Stephanie and I would film it, it was all in a weekend when we weren't working, and we did real one take, live to camera, old school style, and a lot of prep. Like I kind of do the stand up comedian approach where you go from, instead of club to club, I'm going from preschool classroom to preschool classroom, like getting my rhythms right, and then when it's time to film it, I can go straight through. This time around though, season 3, we've had more time to work on it, so Stephanie's been doing tons of different angles and close-ups of the puppets, so you don't always see my mouth moving, and we're using old school special effects where I can play more than one character in the same scene, do some fun split screen things. So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's funny because I had a question here and I was like, oh, I don't want to like seem like this is a I don't know. Like to me it was like, oh, this might be an insulting question to ask. But because some of those shots, like you can plainly see that you are doing the voice of the character when you're having a
Yeah.
conversation. And then there's other scenes where you are completely
Mm-hmm.
obscured. Like when the king's in his castle or whatever, you're kind of hidden behind it. And so you've just kind of explained why that was going
Yeah.
on and if that was a choice. And I think it's also, good for kids to be like, oh, he's doing the voice. Okay.
Yeah.
I see
Well,
that,
there's like 3 points. It's like there's the, oh, I can do this too. I can see what you're doing, and it's not as, sometimes puppets can be a little scary. Like, how is this working? Like, I really show how it's working, and I address. Okay, we're gonna play pretend now. We talk about
Yeah.
the serious thing, then we're gonna play pretend. And because sometimes we talk about really serious stuff, even though it's through the lens of play, I and this is what I learned from studying the work of Mr. Rogers and his mentor, Dr. Margaret McFarlane. Um, you want to go abstract and you want to go into that dream place so that if the kid has experienced something at a personal level in that dream space, they'll know what you're talking about, and you're helping them to process and work through the thing. Maybe not get to a definite answer, but just process it and be with it in the same way that, your subconscious takes over and helps you work through your day when you're sleeping, and you wake up and hopefully you're feeling a little bit better. Um,
Yeah.
but for the kids that didn't have that, whatever complex experience, they can still get something out of it at whatever level. And they can choose to believe this little puppet is fully alive, like they make it alive when they believe in it, or if they're like, that's not alive, but now I'm hearing what this host is saying, or whatever the other adult caregiver is on the show is saying, and it's like, oh, you're real. Okay, like there's many layers to it. It's not just for the little kids; it's for the adults. It's for college kids. I found out not too long ago that college kids like watching my show.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities between those age groups, I think.
Yeah. Well, not only are the puppets on the show handmade, but everything on the show is your sets and your miniatures, and those are all handmade as well.
Yeah, yeah. I again, taking a page from the local kids show hosts of the 50s. Most of it early on is just stretched canvas on wood frames, but it was hard to get up in the basement and or to do live shows. It just became awkward. So instead, this is kind of a fun tip for anyone who's building a set. The hard pink foam board, installation board, I think it's number 150. You can get it at Home Depot, like a giant, 6x7 sheet of this hard board that's super duper light, and you can carve it like wood and get a real nice smooth look to it. And it holds paint really well. You can make these huge pieces and you can pick them up with one hand. And it's given a really nice new look to the series. And it's cheap, which is nice.
Yeah. Well, another great element of your show is that you have songs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a welcome song and a goodbye song, and songs in between. Do you have a music background to bring those? I mean, I know you said you did musical theater, but did you study an instrument and stuff?
Well, I play a little ukulele. I really didn't mean to make the ukulele joke, but I play a little ukulele. I play ukulele by ear, and I studied piano for a little bit when I was a kid, but I didn't really stick with it. So I play by ear, and I lean into the idea of most parents, when you're at home, or caregivers, or whoever's taking care of the young child, they don't have a whole band behind them or a pianist or whatever. So when you're singing a reassuring lullaby, it's just a cappella. So when I do I call them my monologue songs, they're lullabies that I'm hoping a parent might pick up and sing to their kid too. And they're like present day grim fairy tale style lullabies. There's some sort of a lesson,
Yeah.
Working on a song now called You're Not Falling Behind. Because, so many kids are hearing that from their adults, hearing it in the background. Little pitchers have big ears, they're falling behind. They're not, COVID and quarantine. They're failing. They're always going to be behind 2 years. The future is going to be horrible for these, like the kids hear that and feel it, even if they don't completely understand it. I think it's really important to say directly, you're not falling behind. You're exactly where you need to be right now. And there's going to be some mistakes, and you're going to learn from it. And once you feel more secure and safe, it's going to be a lot easier for you to figure out how to learn your letters and numbers and all of those other good things. But yeah, trying to condense that into a song, it's just easier, talking about those complex social things. If you can put it in a song, a short, sweet, an authentic song, it just connects. It connects better. I think it's why, and I was actually talking with my wife about this. I think it's why those darn chants work so well in our political world nowadays. It's like short, sweet, rhyming. I remember this. Oh, we're together. We're all together in this. Like regardless of how one might feel, like, or think about all of those things. It's like, if you can get to that core feeling, like just talking at somebody gets exhausting, the lecture. But if you're singing it, you're speaking to that different part of the brain, that subconscious part. So yeah, music is really, really important in Treehouse for sure.
Yeah. How long does it usually take to write, shoot, and produce an episode of the show?
Oh, well, the development of content, months, sometimes years, because an ongoing topic for us is gun violence. Back in Chicago, the kids I was working with, and again, I worked at lots of different types of schools and different environments and social economic levels, and some kids had very firsthand experiences with gun violence, and some had secondary experiences, and I felt completely overwhelmed in serving the kids in the classroom, let alone through the screen. So I was able to connect with the Fred Rogers Center. I think they're called the Fred Rogers Institute now, but they're in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and it houses all of Fred Rogers' scripts written on the yellow notepads and his research and all the Dr. Margaret McFarland stuff. And I just went there for the week and looked through the I put on my white gloves and went through the archive with their permission. That's when I first started learning about communication. Like, I knew about communicating through play, through the language of play, but that dream type of approach was just a whole other level. and it wasn't necessarily I found anything written specifically on that technique, but you could see it. You could see the examples of some big social issue had come up, and Rogers was going to address it on the show in this safe way. So I kind of broke that down in my own language and brought it back, and just started playing with those concepts. And like I said, going to lots and lots and lots of different preschool classrooms and daycares and testing stuff out and getting all that feedback. So some of those storylines are years in the making. And then some of them, come up a lot faster, like all of the stuff with quarantine and, wearing masks and anxiety and needing some self-regulation and normalizing mental health. We brought in a real feelings doctor. We call them feelings doctors on our show. You got your body doctor, but you need your feelings doctor too for your checkups. Like we were straight up doing therapy through the screen. And again, through that play lens. So the overall deeper ideas and concepts can take a long time. When it's time to actually sit down and write it, because I've been living with it so long, a couple of days per script just to line everything out and hit the beats and make sure we hit the 20-minute mark roughly. And then the filming with this new season, we've been spending up to a week per 20-minute episode, with much higher production value than what we've done in the past. In the past, we would do 10 episodes in a weekend, just banging them out, but it was a different level of production quality.
I think that's a great thing for people to see is that, in the beginning, you were shooting 10 episodes in a weekend, and now, you take a week to do an episode. It's great because you just got started. You know what I mean? And you used what you had at that moment to get episodes done. Yeah. And now you have a little bit more of a luxury where you can, have better production values, as you said, but you're not going to be like, oh, I'm going to go back and fix those early episodes we did because I don't like the way they, like compared to where we are
right.
now.
Well, I mean, and it's like the old shows that lasted, that weren't just like, we know going into production, we are going to do maybe 2-3 seasons of this show and we're going to make it super popular because it's going to be very similar to all of the other things that are super popular on YouTube or on whatever network. There's kind of almost a cookie cutter approach with some shows. Not all of them. I think some shows are really, tipping the scale and doing amazing new things. But with a lot of shows, you see the patterns of the big heads and the big eyes and the high pitched voices and, the stuff that sells. The unboxing of some sort, variation of that. But with the old shows that were around for generations, there's an evolution because they're human beings like we all, I'm positive 15-year-old you to 20-year-old you to you now. It's always you, but they're different people in a way. And I think a kids show host that is being their authentic selves, or even if they're doing a character, you see a growth. And I think that's amazing, again, for the audience to see, for the kid that's also growing up, like, oh yeah, I can make big mistakes. It's not going to be perfect the first time. We've got a song called Practice Makes Better. Like I've never achieved perfect, but I can get better at something if I keep trying. So, you model the behaviors too. You don't just talk about it, you show it. So I love looking back at the early shows that, they are what they are, but it has the same amount of heart, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, to me, it's inspiring because it's that, you're getting it done, you're using what you have. And when you upgrade or when you can upgrade, you do. And, as you said, starting out with canvas backgrounds and it's like, oh, I found this new thing that we can upgrade it and make it a little bit better. And, just keep going. I love it. Are you shooting you mentioned you were shooting on phones. Are you still shooting on phones or do you have a camera? Or
no,
what are you shooting on?
Well, when it was just me, it was my phone. Once Stephanie started digging into production, she has a nice Canon camera. Gosh, I mean, you could just use a smartphone and it would be more than fine. I know plenty of nice shows that are shot on phones, but that's what she's most comfortable with, a more traditional camera. And then we've got our editing software, and yeah, same sort of thing. Like you just keep collecting these little pieces along the way.
Do you are the shows scripted in that like each line is scripted, or do you just kind of follow a like a sort of a beat sheet?
It depends on what we're working on. Like when we have other caregivers come on, I call them caregivers because for the most part, we don't have actors come on to play a part. I'm trying to find someone who truly does represent whatever the topic is that we're talking about and has the expertise to talk about it. Like when we were doing shows about gun violence, we had this amazing woman from Baltimore, where we live now. We live in Baltimore now. Her name is Erica Bridgeford, and she works for Baltimore Ceasefire, which is this amazing group of individuals that whenever someone is shot and killed in Baltimore, which happens way too often, they will come out into that space and remember those who got hurt, and there's a memorial aspect to it, but it's more about just being with the community and reminding everybody we're together in this, and we can be with this, and we can try to heal the space, and just accept that a lot of complex things brought every different player in this tragedy to this moment. But it's not a news story with a beginning, middle, end. You're the good guy, you're the bad guy. It is complex, and they embrace that, and they give everybody this moment of like growth. So, and she'll burn incense and do really amazing things in these spaces. So she came on Danny Joe's Treehouse. Teddy, little teddy bear, saw Kingsley waving a stick at the sky, saying, "Only the bluebirds in my sky. All the other birds have to stay on the ground." And that sort of language came from children playing, and that scared Teddy. Teddy saw it on a smartphone, and then got himself a stick and was waving a stick and accidentally tore the king's wings because the king wanted to fly in the sky too, and that was representational of losing control. You choose how to use this stick. The stick doesn't choose how to use you. That sort of stuff, and Teddy was more than just a good or bad guy, and the king was more than just a good or bad guy. And Erica came out just to be with these kids. She was blowing bubbles throughout the playground, just walking around and blowing bubbles and just being in the space. And there was very little talking in the whole thing. And that, my opening monologue for it and my closing thought for it was written out. But with Erica, we did like have our beat sheet and did a lot of pre-show conversation about what do we want to communicate to these kids, and what do you really say to kids when this happens, and how can we abstract it in the dream play world. And so there is a lot of room for improvising, but when it's just me, I try very careful to stick to the script and hit the line that I want to hit and say it in just the right way, and then go back around, especially when the puppets are being silly, and have the room to improvise and slide in jokes that the adults are going to appreciate probably more than the kids, and just have fun with it. So we try to find that balance too between the sometimes serious, sometimes sad, but always sincere, and silly stuff can happen too. It's the whole human experience. For anyone who's super frustrated that, because I know I'm not the only person interested in doing this sort of communication. I know there are tons and tons of other hosts that want to do that, and are capable of doing that, and are trying to do that. And if you're anything like me, you probably often hear, well, that's not gonna, no one wants that. Who's going to buy that? No. We want, do the thing, do the point at the tree and say tree, point at the grass and say grass, keep it simple, and we're going to sell it. And you can make as many videos as possible so you can get that algorithm working for you. That's what we're going to do. And if you get enough hits, then we're going to start paying you to do more of the same sort of junk. Like if you choose to do that, great. And you're enjoying it. That's fine. There really isn't judgment. But if you want to go deeper, you shouldn't feel this pressure to compromise. Because if you do, you're not going to be happy doing whatever. Yeah. Maybe you'll make money, but it really doesn't bring happiness, Yeah. So anyway, don't give up. You'll find what you're looking for, I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent advice for folks. We're especially creating stuff for the internet.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, like I'll have a video like just some goofy video where I have an idea and it'll do well. And I'm like, oh, is this my thing now? Like, is this, is this like, because really on these apps, like you talk about TikTok, you talk about Instagram or YouTube or whatever, it's you find your thing, and once it's the thing that hits, it's like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you want to keep growing, you just keep remaking that video in the same way, and it's so frustrating. And then I'll just joke around. I'll just be like, oh, this is my thing now. I got to do this thing because it hit.
Thinking of Henson, like he was so great at doing the commercials and doing the stuff, but doing it in his way and knowing that I am doing this so I can do what I really want to do. Like there's a way to find that balance where you can do what you need to do to make the money. And if whatever you're doing to make the money is like crushing your soul, there are other ways that you can compromise, like you can find a balance.
Well, in 2019, you did some live shows at the Black Cherry Puppet Theater.
Oh yeah.
And those were in October of 2019, just a little bit before everything shut down and the world went crazy. How did those shows go? And because I know you were like going to film those sort of to make episodes of the show.
Right.
And were there plans to do more live shows, and then the pandemic got in the way?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah, it was at Black Cherry Puppet Theater, and then we were also doing them at the Creative Alliance, which is another great theater slash art gallery. But the Black Cherry Puppet Theater is like this gem in Baltimore. It is magical. It's in Pigstown, real small area of well, no, it's not. It's a huge area of Baltimore. It's just hard to get people to that theater. But when you get there, you're like, why haven't I been coming here? This is amazing. Like, tons of puppetry for adults. And they do a lot of outreach for schools. And that first puppet slam that I went to, they were like, yeah, I think, come try it out. Just try it out. Do what you're doing. And I was like, yeah, well, my audience is preschoolers. Like, you're doing pretty sophisticated shadow box stuff and beautiful work. And they're like, no, just pretend our adults are preschoolers. So I did, and I had them like it was pretty amazing. Like people got emotional. They were singing along. And then afterwards I found out a lot of the people at that show were college kids from Hopkins and Micah who were watching Treehouse, and so they already had this connection. They just randomly found it somehow. And yeah, I think again, the college age kids and preschoolers are pretty similar because there's that striving for independence. I can do it, but I really, still, will you take care of me? And what's going to happen next? Like, it's very, very similar. So it makes sense to me that they would be into it.
Yeah.
And then it went really well, and they were like, well, dude, let's do a full-on Dangerous Treehouse. And we did it, and it was great, and it was packed, and it was amazing. And yeah, the plan was to do it like live to tape, live stream it, and again, have that like modern retro take on the local kids show. And yeah, all things quarantine.
Right.
And then we just started live streaming episodes pretty much daily through Facebook for a while, until I started getting messages that we were spending so much time on Facebook, we're starting to get impacted by other stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, you just keep changing. It's like, you've got to pivot, hang on to what's consistent with you and what your voice is going to be and what you're making, what your art is, what you want to comment on, and know that, at some point, I don't know how it worked for Bert Tillstrom, but was he on radio before he got into TV, discovered TV at the department store? Like, there must have been a group of people on radio that were like, oh, what's this thing? And they just, like, there's always going to be, you can bring what you've got into the next stage.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm trying to get to. Ugh.
Right. You recently started your own production studio to help other creators with their kid show ideas. So I'd love to know more about that and starting that up and what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah. If anybody's interested, let me know. It's called LaBrecque Studios. And around, well, a little bit before quarantine times, I had other artists reaching out to me to write for shows they were working on. And I enjoyed doing that and realized pretty quickly that I needed to separate what I was doing from Treehouse stuff and independent writing stuff and working for others. My attorney was like, you should maybe form two separate LLCs to keep your money separate and be safe in case whatever happens in the future where someone goes after the big money of Danny Joe's Treehouse and then all your LaBrecque Studios money goes, planning way far in advance. Like there's no concerns about that right now. But anyway, so I formed this LLC. I never did anything with it. LaBrecque Studios just sounded good. And then I realized, going back to people like Erica Bridgeford Ford and Max and Root, the Beatbox Dads, our local artists here in Baltimore that come on the show a lot. There are all these amazing voices that really want to reach a broader audience, and they have the same sort of concerns that I had about not wanting to compromise and wanting to be a human voice, not just behind the camera, but like that sense of, I know I can connect through the screen in a healthy way. And and the philosophy was, well, we can bring back human voices to kids media. We can definitely do that and make it appealing. And again, if instead of asking permission from someone else to do it for you, just if you get to the point where you're writing all the scripts and you're writing all the songs and you're building the puppets and you're building the sets, you might as well name your production studio and help others too, because there's so many great voices and there's so many tough things that kids and their grown-ups are dealing with. Like we need the new surge of the local kids show hosts. We need that service instead of selling. So we signed Max and Root, and I've been talking to some other artists and trying to figure out ways to get in the side door. Like I feel like I got lucky. Well, no, I'm gonna actually not say lucky. I feel like I worked really hard to figure out how to get my stuff in front of more eyes without compromising my values. And I do know where the doors are. You can tell that I'm learning a new language right now. Like I have confidence on that side, but I know how you can break through without compromising. So I'm trying to bring more people with me, and that's the idea with LaBrecque Studios. So if anyone's interested, if anyone's struggling and you just need a sounding board or a little help on something, let me know. Look up LaBrecque Studios. I'd be glad to talk with you, tell you what I know.
There you go. Yeah, no, and even you and I in the past have corresponded back and forth about different things.
Yeah.
And it's always fun to find a like-minded person. Speaking of that, for the puppeteer or the creator out there who wants to start their own show in this day and age, whether it be a show for younger audiences like yours or for older folks, what is like your one go-to piece of advice that you want to give to those people?
This is a good piece of advice. It's not actually, it's not mine, but I still carry it with me. So I was reaching out to lots of mentors, like people that I grew up with, that I watched on the screen. I got really lucky and connected with a lot of them. And one of the people that I connected with was Betty Aberlin. I wrote to her a couple times. She was Lady Aberlin on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Ugga Mugga. And we corresponded a couple times actually through Facebook. And at one point, because I was absolutely that fan that was just asking too many questions, I think, you get so excited. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to a childhood memory right now, But at a certain point, she was like, well, I'm not going to be able to give you more time, but I am going to give you some good advice. Although it is incredibly important to understand why you admire and are influenced by those that came before you, it is exceedingly more important to be the first you instead of the next somebody else. And that just hit me, it really did. Yeah. And I think it applies to so many artists. Like the Beatles were a cover band, like we are inspired by others. That inspiration helps us to grow. But at a certain point, you've got your own voice. And if you're true to that voice and you like what you're doing, you're going to find your audience. Even if it's a small audience, it doesn't really matter. If you're authentically connecting with them and you feel good about what you're doing, you are succeeding. You are a success. It's not about the numbers. We get too hung up on numbers nowadays. If you don't have 1 billion subscribers or whatever, I'm going to fail. I'm failing. There's that lesson that we're taught. And it's just not true. It's not about numbers. It's not about making a ton of money. I worry about those kids that I talk about kid influencers all the time, and there is a generation of kid influencers now that are in their teens, 20s, that have a career path where they can say, well, forget college. I can make bank doing videos on my phone. I'm going to go live in a content house in LA with other creators. My managers are going to get 50% of whatever I'm making, but who cares? I get to hang out with these other beautiful people. But once they get there, all they're doing they're just making content. Maybe they care about, maybe they don't. But the lesson is, it's about how much money you can make. It's about this fame. And if you're happy doing that, again, trying not to sound judgy, great, good for you. That's wonderful. But you should know you should make the choice. Like, is the goal in life just to have everybody know who you are and make lots and lots of money? I think people go to university or, do independent study or homeschool to grow and learn and nourish yourself and connect and communicate. I think if we put more value on that, the other stuff's going to come too, like what you need when it comes to reach and funding and whatever else. But I think we need to, going back to mental health, I think we need to take care of ourselves. And this growth thing impacts us, whether you're being a kid show host or you're just like, trying to keep up with your old friends from high school or parents online. There's been some stuff going on for a while that I think we need to like step back and take a look at and try to analyze and pause and start to take slightly different approaches.
Yeah. Well, I think that is excellent food for thought for everybody, especially in this stage. And if you are a content creator, great stuff to keep in mind. I always love to end the interview by asking the same question. I'll ask that of you. What has been the highlight of your puppetry career or your content creator career so far?
There's there's two. The first one, and I talk about Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood so much, but it really was such an important part of my childhood. Like, it really was the extra adult voice that helped to raise me when my parents needed backup, So, and I fully understand that a lot of that is just me projecting onto the puppet, like that's it. But the day that I had transitioned from teaching in the classroom, and I was doing curriculum development for the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. And I was tasked with doing a family event, and we needed some sort of core activity. It was wintertime, and I thought a sweater drive would be great. And I knew that Family Communications, now they're called the Fred Rogers Company or Productions, I think, but at that time they were still Family Communications. They would do sweater drives at schools and libraries and things. So I did a cold call and left a voicemail. And 5 minutes later, I get a call from Mr. McFeely because David Newell was their PR guy and was still active at that time, again, early aughts. And I immediately recognized the voice and just tried to hold back from, what's the term now, fanboying. I was just so excited. And he ended the call with speedy delivery. I about lost my stuff running around the office. He said it. And then he came out and did the sweater drive, and I got to know him. And over time, he just became this mentor. In the very first episode of Dangerous Treehouse season 1, that's on Sensical, he's the guest. He not as Mr. McFeely, but just David. And he brings me the stuff to make a tin can phone so I can be in contact with other people. And that was the most surreal, beautiful, like talking about sticking to the script. I was just glee. You can see my glee in all of these interactions, and it's all happening in our basement. Like he stayed at our house. This was our basement apartment. Our kids were little and running around, and it was just this amazing experience. That was insane. Well, and I won't bore you with other ones, but I think that's probably one of the big old highlights for me.
Excellent. Well, Danny, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today, and I'll encourage everyone listening to go check out Danny Joe's Treehouse.
Yes, please.
Many thanks to Danny Joe LaBrecque for being on the show. For links to Danny Joe's Treehouse, as well as to some of the things we discussed on this episode, check out the show notes for episode number 78 over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more of my talk with Danny Joe LaBrecque, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. Well, now it's time to announce the winner for episode 77's giveaway for an Inner Monster kit by puppeteer Jamie Shannon. The question was, what profession does Mallory Lewis say rarely gets harassed at the mall? And the answer was dry cleaners. And the winner is Smith Henderson. Congratulations, Smith. Your Inner Monster puppet kit is on the way. Now it's time for this episode's giveaway, and it is for a copy of Ventriloquism Made Easy by Paul Stadelman and Bruce Fife. This book promises to teach you how to talk to your hand without looking stupid. To be entered to win, simply answer this question from the episode you just heard. What material does Danny Joe LaBrecque use to build the sets for Danny Joe's Treehouse? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by December 15th, 2022. One entry per household, and due to recent issues shipping the prizes to winners, these giveaways are now only open to those listeners with a mailing address in the United States of America. The winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the January 2023 episode of the show. Good luck! I want to send a special thank you out to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make Under the Puppet possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Andrew Calcagno, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Scott Armstrong, Vicky Sebring, and Dorothy Pachoco. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604. Or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send your feedback via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Twitter while it lasts by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. Thank you so much for listening. This episode of Under the Puppet was edited by Steven Staver and featured music by Dan Ring. Help spread the word about the show by sharing your favorite Under the Puppet episode with a friend. Under the Puppet is copyright 2022 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.